It is a funny thing about pop culture. We look back at these iconic moments, things that completely defined a generation, and we just naturally assume they were born out of, I don't know, boundless creative freedom.
Right, like total artistic liberty.
Exactly. Take Mick Jagger, for example. When you picture him in your head, you picture that incredibly flamboyant, wildly kinetic stage dancing.
Oh yeah, all elbows and knees strutting around like a peacock.
Right. And we look at that and assume it was just his artistic spirit manifesting itself in its purest form. But the reality is actually wild.
Oh.
Yeah, when the Rolling Stones were first starting out, they played in venues so incredibly tiny and with so much equipment crammed onto the stage that Jagger literally only had a space about the size of a coffee table to move around in.
Oh wow, so he couldn't pace or run across the stage?
He couldn't. He had to invent a way to be dynamic while trapped in a tiny box. Or, I mean, look at the most recognizable video game character in human history. Mario. Why does Mario have a giant mustache and a big red hat? It wasn't some high-minded fashion choice by a visionary artist.
Let me guess, hardware limitations.
Exactly. Early 8-bit technology was so limited that the designers literally couldn't animate hair or facial expressions properly without it looking like a blurry mess. So, a mustache hid the mouth and a hat hid the hair.
It is entirely counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, from a very young age, we are conditioned to believe that limitations are the enemy of greatness.
Yeah, totally.
We view them as walls that hold us down, things that somehow make our work or our lives less than they could be if we just had, more money, more time, or more freedom.
Exactly. But those limitations were the exact things that made those cultural icons so memorable. Okay, let's unpack this. Our focal point today is a book called A Beautiful Constraint by Adam Morgan and Mark Barden.
It's a fantastic read.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is to completely flip your perspective on limitations. Because whether you are looking at a microscopic budget at work, trying to manage a total lack of time at home, or dealing with some insanely strict rule you just can't change, those constraints aren't actually holding you back.
Right, they are actually the tools.
Yes. If you understand the mechanics of how to use them, they are the secret catalysts for your greatest breakthroughs.
Which brings us to the first massive hurdle we have to clear, and that's our own emotional reaction.
Oh man, yeah, that initial panic.
Exactly. Before we can start deploying practical tools to overcome a limitation, we have to acknowledge our default emotional state when a constraint is suddenly slapped on us. Like, when a project budget is slashed in half, the immediate reaction is usually paralysis.
Just total deer in the headlights.
Right. But Morgan and Barden make a crucial point in the book. Feeling paralyzed is a biological and psychological first step. It is just a reaction. It is not the final destination.
You really see this mechanism at play in businesses that take a massive, potentially fatal constraint and somehow turn it into their core identity. Think about Zappos.
Oh, the shoe company.
Right. They became famous for their absolutely mind-blowing customer service. But they didn't institute that just because they wanted to be nice guys. They did it because, back in the late 90s, being an online shoe store meant they had a massive foundational constraint.
People couldn't try the shoes on.
Exactly. Trust in e-commerce was basically zero. They had to compensate so heavily for that limitation that they essentially engineered a world-class customer service company that just happened to sell shoes.
That makes total sense. Or take Southwest Airlines.
Oh yeah, the airline story is wild.
Back in the 70s, they were flying 4 routes, but they ran out of money and had to sell one of their planes just to stay afloat.
Which left them with only 3 planes.
Right. And standard industry turnaround time at the gate back then was about an hour. They physically couldn't maintain their 4-route schedule with 3 planes unless they completely reinvented the turnaround process.
So they were forced to invent the 10-minute turnaround.
Yes, and they introduced unallocated seating, which everyone thought was absolute madness at the time, just to get people on and off the plane faster.
But I have to push back slightly here.
Okay, go ahead.
Because it's so easy for us to sit here decades later and call the Southwest team geniuses.
Right.
But in that actual moment, losing 25% of your fleet doesn't feel like a fun, creative challenge.
No, it feels like a disaster.
It feels like a total crisis. It feels like the end of the company. So aren't some people just naturally wired to be innovative in a crisis, while the rest of us are naturally victims to our limits?
It is a fair question, and it's a very common assumption, but the research presented by the authors argues a definitive no.
Really?
Yeah, it is not about innate personality types. It is about cognitive stages of perception.
Yeah.
They point to Michael B. Root, who's one of the most famous graphic designers in the world. He admits that even with decades of experience and countless awards, every single time he gets a brief with a really tough constraint, he goes through 3 distinct stages.
What's the first one?
The first is the victim stage. This is where you just resent the constraint. Your brain wants to conserve energy, so your instinct is to simply lower your ambition to fit the limitation. You say, we only have 3 planes, so we can only fly 3 routes.
The classic compromise. You just accept a lesser version of your goal.
Precisely. It is the path of least resistance. But if you force yourself to sit with the problem, you move to the second stage, which they call the neutralizer.
Neutralizer.
Here, you refuse to lower your ambition, and instead, you try to find a workaround. You try to neutralize the constraint so you can deliver the original goal anyway.
Okay, that sounds better than being a victim.
It is, but the real magic, the actual paradigm shift, happens in the third stage, the transformer.
The transformer state.
This is where you actually use the constraint as the core opportunity. You use it to increase your ambition. Like, Southwest didn't just survive by neutralizing the lost plane. They built a completely new, highly profitable business model because of that constraint, the ultra-low-cost carrier.
So you're saying anyone can intentionally move through these stages. It's not just a roll of the genetic dice.
This raises an important question, right? How do we actually help you move from a victim to a transformer?
Yeah, how do we do that?
The book breaks it down into 3 specific requirements. First, mindset. You have to actually believe a breakthrough is possible, overriding that initial panic.
Makes sense.
Second, method. You need a tangible framework, a way to actually start the process of finding the solution. And third, motivation. You have to want it badly enough to push through the cognitive discomfort.
Right.
If you are low on any of these 3, you will stay stuck in the victim stage, just blaming the constraint for your failure.
Okay, I really want to dig into that method part, because I think that's where most people get physically stuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if I have the mindset and the motivation, I sit at my desk, my budget gets cut, and my brain just freezes. And I think it's because we have this overwhelming tendency to rely on what has worked before.
Yes.
I like to think of it like driving a wagon on an old dirt road. Over the years, the heavy wagons leave these deep, deep ruts in the mud. Eventually, those ruts harden.
You get stuck in them.
Exactly. The next time you drive down that road, your tires just fall into those ruts. And even if you turn the steering wheel with all your might, you can't steer anywhere else. You are locked in. The authors call this path dependence.
Path dependence is a fascinating and often invisible trap. As human beings, we naturally rely on the tools, the data, and the historical processes that brought us past success.
Because it's efficient.
Exactly, it is efficient. But when a completely new constraint appears, yesterday's path is usually the exact thing blinding us to tomorrow's solution.
The book shares this mind-blowing historical fact about path dependence that I just haven't been able to stop thinking about. So you know the space shuttle, right?
Of course.
Literally, one of the most advanced pieces of human engineering ever created. It had those 2 solid rocket boosters attached to the side. Well, the width of those boosters was strictly dictated by the fact that they had to be shipped by train from the factory in Utah to the launch pad in Florida.
Okay, so they had to fit on a standard train car.
Right. They could only be as wide as a standard American railroad track, which is 4 feet, 8.5 inches. But why that incredibly specific width?
I have no idea.
Because early American railroads were built by English expatriates who just copied the standard English rail gauge.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. And why did the English use that gauge? Because the people who built the early tramways used the exact same jigs and tools used for building horse-drawn wagons.
So the wagons dictated the trains, which dictated the spaceship.
Yes, but it goes deeper. Why were the wagons that wide? Because they had to fit into the deep ruts left on the ancient roads built by the Roman Empire for Roman war chariots.
That is incredible. A 20th century space marvel restricted by the wheelbase of a 2,000-year-old horse cart.
It's insane. But it perfectly illustrates how deeply locked in a system can become.
It's almost comical when you trace it back. And what Morgan and Barden point out is that one of the most subtle yet powerful ways path dependence takes hold in our own lives is actually through the language we use every day.
Not a language.
The words we choose dictate the paths we take.
I'm so glad you brought up language, because there is this brilliant story about a luxury car dealer that completely changed how I think about this.
The Four Seasons story. It's a perfect example.
Yeah.
So a group of luxury car dealers were touring a Four Seasons hotel to learn about high-end customer service. One of these dealers, who considered his showroom salespeople to be the highly paid stars of his business, was just totally amazed by the incredible enthusiasm of a young man working down in the hotel's laundry room.
Just a guy doing laundry.
Right. So the dealer asked the hotel manager how he could possibly get the back end of his dealership, meaning the people washing and servicing the cars, to be that motivated.
And what did the manager say?
The hotel manager pointed out the problem instantly. He said, "I'll tell you what a back end is," pointing to his own behind.
Oh, wow.
He explained that at the Four Seasons, they absolutely ban that term. They don't call those employees the back end. They call them the heart of house.
That is amazing.
Hmm.
It completely changes your relationship with the employee.
It dictates behavior entirely. If you call someone the heart of house, you go out of your way to check on them. You know their names. You value their input because they are the heart of the operation.
Right.
The car dealer's language had locked him into a path where he structurally ignored a massive portion of his workforce. His own vocabulary blinded him to the opportunity to innovate his customer experience.
So to shatter that path dependence, you can't just casually brainstorm. You have to actively force your brain into a new gear. And there's this incredible real-world example of Leadership Public Schools, or LPS, in California.
Right. They had a really tough situation.
They were facing constraints that would make anyone a victim. A lot of their kids were coming into high school 4 or 5 years behind grade level in reading and math. And at the exact same time, their state funding was being brutally slashed.
And the standard path-dependent response to students falling that far behind is to prescribe hundreds of hours of one-on-one after-school tutoring.
Exactly. But LPS couldn't afford to pay for that. And frankly, a lot of their students had night jobs or family care duties and physically couldn't stay after school anyway.
Right.
So if they stayed on the old path, the old wagon ruts, they would have had to lower their ambition. They would have accepted that these kids just weren't going to catch up. But instead, they decided to be transformers.
They kept their ambition high.
They set an unwavering ambition of 100% college readiness.
Yeah.
To hit it without extra hours, they realized they needed instant intervention, catching a student's misunderstanding the exact second it happens in the classroom, not days later when grading a homework assignment.
Okay, so how do they do it with no budget?
Well, someone donated a bunch of those old audience polling clickers. You know, the little remotes where you press A, B, or C.
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
They hacked together an app called Exit Ticket using these clickers. It gave the teacher a real-time digital dashboard of exactly who was grasping the math concept in that moment and who was totally lost.
Wow.
It allowed for instant personalized help during the actual class time. The result? Kids were jumping 2 to 3 grade levels in a single year.
What's fascinating here is how LPS arrived at that solution. They didn't just sit in a room and hope for a good idea. They used a very specific cognitive tool that Morgan and Barden call a propelling question.
Propelling question.
Yes, it takes a bold ambition and intentionally welds it to a significant constraint.
It creates this massive, almost painful tension in your brain.
It does, and that tension is biologically necessary. Let's unpack the psychology of that for a moment. The human brain loves heuristics, mental shortcuts. When you ask a standard question, the brain just pulls up the old wagon rut. But when you ask a propelling question, it forces and thinking instead of either thinking.
Meaning you can't just choose the easy way out.
Exactly. Psychological research shows that when people are presented with paradoxical frames, situations that seem entirely contradictory, they actually become more creative. It creates a level of cognitive discomfort that physically prevents the brain from falling back on its habitual path. It demands a novel solution.
The book has these rapid-fire examples of propelling questions that really show how this works. Think about Audi.
Okay.
They wanted to win the grueling 24-hour Le Mans race. The path-dependent question, the one every other engineering team was asking, is how do we build a car that goes faster? But Audi's propelling question was, how do we win Le Mans without a car that goes faster?
Which, to an automotive engineer, sounds completely paradoxical. It sounds impossible.
Exactly. But because it broke their mental models, it forced the engineering team to look at fuel efficiency instead of top speed. They introduced diesel technology to race cars.
So they didn't have to stop as much.
Exactly. They won because their car wasn't faster, but it required fewer pit stops. It stayed on the track longer. Or look at IKEA.
Oh, IKEA is a great example.
Their propelling question was, How do we make a well-designed, incredibly durable table and sell it for a profit at €5?
€5.
That is the price of a fancy coffee.
Yeah.
You can't just tweak your lumber supply chain to hit that number. You have to completely shatter your path. So they went to door manufacturers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they literally figured out how to cut an interior door in half, put legs on it, and call it a table.
The discomfort of the propelling question, the sheer absurdity of it, is the exact mechanism that propels you toward those radically new solutions.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You might be sitting there thinking, well, I don't want to make myself uncomfortable. I'm just going to stick to reasonable goals and avoid the headache.
Sure, that's natural.
But the authors warn about the rise of the unreasonable challenger. If you don't ask yourself these uncomfortable, propelling questions, your competition eventually will. Because consumers today have been trained to expect the impossible. We simply do not accept trade-offs anymore.
The historical days of choosing between quality and price, or choosing between speed and sustainability, are rapidly fading.
Totally fading.
Yeah.
Look at Tesla. Consumers used to just accept that if you wanted an electric green car, it was going to look like a plastic golf cart and go 0 to 60 in about 3 business days.
Right?
Tesla asked the propelling question, how do we make a zero-emissions car that is also a rocket-fast luxury sports car? Or Chipotle. The trade-off in the 90s was, you can have cheap fast food or you can have healthy, ethically sourced food. Pick one.
And Chipotle said, we'll do both.
Chipotle said, we'll give you fast food and ethical food. If you don't force your own business or your own career to answer these paradoxes, an unreasonable challenger is going to come along, solve the paradox, and make you completely obsolete.
But this brings us to a very real human problem. Once you ask one of these propelling questions, the difficulty level is so intensely high that natural optimism immediately begins to decay.
Oh yeah, the brainstorming high wears off really fast.
When a team is faced with a massive constraint, the very first instinct is to point out all the reasons it won't work. So how do you stop your team or yourself from just immediately giving up?
This is where Colin Kelly comes in. He was the director of research and development at Warburton's, a massive bakery brand in the UK.
Right.
He noticed that whenever his team was trying to innovate around a tight constraint, someone would inevitably say, well, we can't do that because, and the moment those words were spoken, the flow of problem solving just died. The oxygen left the room.
It's a momentum killer.
So he instituted a strict, non-negotiable rule. He completely banned the phrase, we can't because. If you wanted to raise a hurdle or point out a flaw, you were forced to start your sentence with the words, we can if.
It sounds like a simple linguistic trick, but psychologically it is profound.
Okay, I have to admit, if my boss came in tomorrow and banned the word can't, I think I would find that incredibly irritating.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds a little like toxic positivity, just forcing everyone to smile and ignore the very real problems.
That is a very common reaction, but it's important to understand the mechanism behind it because it is the opposite of toxic positivity. It's actually about accountability.
Accountability.
Yeah. When someone says, we can't use that packaging because it slows down the assembly line, they have absolved themselves of a problem. They have successfully identified a threat, which feels rewarding to the brain, and now the problem belongs to someone else.
Ah, they become an obstacle spotter.
Exactly. But if they're forced to say, we can use that packaging if we run it on a different assembly line, it forces their brain out of threat detection mode and into problem-solving mode. It forces them to take responsibility for the solution.
Oh, I see.
It keeps the oxygen of optimism alive and shifts the entire group's identity from victims of circumstance to proactive solution finders.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It is about keeping the momentum going. Because usually when you solve one constraint, it just reveals a new one.
Almost always.
I think of it like playing a video game. You spend hours beating a really tough level, you finally unlock the door, and boom, you step into the next room, and you're immediately facing an even harder boss battle.
Right.
But the can-if momentum ensures you never put the controller down. There's this incredible story in the book about the economic miracle of Taiwan, which is basically a giant decades-long cascade of can-ifs.
Taiwan in the mid-20th century was a densely populated island with virtually no natural resources, very little capital, and severe economic constraints.
Right.
They asked a propelling question: how do we dramatically boost our economy when we have absolutely no natural resources to export?
And the cascade begins. They said,
Yeah.
we can, if we redefine natural resources to mean our people. Okay, so you need to educate the people to be a high-tech workforce. But they hit a new boss battle.
Mhm.
They didn't have enough teachers. So we can, if we use recent college graduates and train them on the job.
But then they lacked infrastructure.
Exactly. They didn't have enough school buildings to put all these new students in. We can if we bring in the private sector and use their corporate buildings.
Every single solution generated a brand new constraint. But because they maintained that relentless can-if mindset, they didn't stop. They adapted.
You just kept going.
Yes. They combined vocational training with private company partnerships, continuously failing forward, iterating, and pushing past the boundaries of their resources until they became a global tech powerhouse.
Which perfectly sets up this next concept. Taiwan had limited resources, but they still had some things to work with. People, private buildings. But what do you do when you literally have nothing?
Nothing at all.
When you completely lack the physical or financial resources to proceed at all? How do you create abundance out of thin air?
To understand how to operate with zero resources, the authors look at the world of improv theater.
Improv.
Yes. When improv actors step onto a stage, they have no script, no props, no costumes, and no set. They have absolutely nothing.
Right, just an empty stage.
But their entire methodology requires them to treat every single suggestion from the audience or from their scene partner as an offer. If someone points at empty space and says, "Look out for that dragon," they don't say, "There is no dragon."
Because that would kill the scene.
Exactly. They accept the offer, they find the hidden value in it, and they build on it. When you are severely constrained in business or life, you have to adopt this exact mindset.
Okay.
You have to look around and see hidden offers everywhere. You have to find unrealized value in what you already have so you can trade it for what you desperately need.
The launch of Virgin America is an absolute masterpiece of this hidden offer concept.
Oh, this is a great example.
They wanted to launch as this super glamorous, high-end domestic airline. But they had a tiny fraction of the marketing budget that legacy carriers like Delta or American had. They literally couldn't afford a massive advertising blitz.
Right.
So they look at their assets. What did they have? Well, they had planes. And they realized, wait, our planes have mood lighting and leather seats. What if we reframe the plane? It's not just a transport vehicle. It's a catwalk in the sky.
They found the hidden offer in their own inventory.
Exactly. So they went to Victoria's Secret and said, hey, we'll host an in-flight fashion show for your models on the way to LA. Victoria's Secret gets a cool, unique venue, and Virgin America gets massive free media coverage.
Brilliant.
Then they went to Method, the eco-friendly soap company, and put their premium products in the bathrooms, giving method-free sampling to a captive high-income audience.
And didn't they do something with tech, too?
Yes. They even partnered with Google to put Chromebooks on flights, so all the Silicon Valley influencers would get on board, use the free Wi-Fi, and tweet about how amazing the airline was. They traded the unique environment of their planes to create an absolute abundance of marketing buzz that they never, ever could have paid for in cash.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Morgan and Barden actually categorize where you can look to find these hidden resources when your budget is zero.
Oh.
There are 3 main areas to hunt.
Okay, what are they?
First, your invested stakeholders. Think about the craft beer company BrewDog. During the recession, they couldn't get a traditional bank loan to save their lives.
They were out of money.
Completely. So they turned to their most passionate fans, launched an Equity for Punks crowdfunding campaign, and raised £7 million directly from the people who loved their beer.
Which is incredibly risky. But they traded equity and community inclusion for sheer survival.
Precisely. The second area is resource owners. These are people who have an abundance of something you need, even if it looks like garbage to them.
Okay, like who?
Well, we talked about IKEA earlier. The founder of IKEA noticed that farmers in China were plucking chickens and just burning the feathers as waste. He realized those feathers were a resource.
Oh, wow.
He bought them for pennies and used them to stuff affordable comforters, solving a massive supply chain constraint by turning someone else's trash into his treasure.
And the third area, this one is just so audacious and brilliant, is the competition.
Yes.
Dixons.co.uk was a British online electronics retailer. They had great prices, but they couldn't afford to have giant physical showrooms with expert staff to answer all the complicated customer questions.
Because showrooms are expensive.
Right. So they ran a marketing campaign calling themselves the last place you want to go. They explicitly told customers to go down the street to their brick-and-mortar rivals, use their beautiful physical showrooms, ask their highly trained expert staff all the questions, and then go home and buy the item cheaper online at Dixons.
It is highly predatory, yes, but it perfectly highlights the core truth. Resources are literally all around you if you are willing to break your path dependence and actually look for them. They use their competitors' payroll as their own customer service department.
So what does this all mean? We have covered a lot of psychological ground here. You can move from being a victim of your constraints to a transformer.
Exactly.
You do it by recognizing and breaking those deep wagon ruts of path dependence. You do it by asking yourself propelling questions that marry your boldest ambition to your toughest limitation, creating that necessary discomfort.
And you maintain that.
Right. You keep your team moving forward using the can-if method to maintain accountability. And finally, you look at the mundane assets around you as hidden offers to be traded for abundance.
The immediate takeaway for your daily life is this. The next time your boss hands your project and tells you the budget has been slashed, or the deadline is ridiculous, or the compliance rules are seemingly impossible, do not shrink your ambition.
Don't give up.
Do not default to the victim stage and immediately ask how you can do less. Recognize that you have just been handed the exact friction required to spark genuine innovation. You have been given the raw materials to do something truly original.
Which leaves me with one final kind of wild thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If constraints are the true engine of human creativity, what happens when we remove them? What if total abundance, having infinite time, infinite money, and zero rules, is actually the ultimate constraint on human potential?
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
If you had absolutely no limits in your life, if you had an endless stage to run around on or infinite pixels to draw with, would you ever be forced to invent that iconic Mick Jagger dance? Would you ever invent Mario's mustache? Would you ever be forced to invent anything beautiful at all?